me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello.
Hello, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. You know what that means. Time to press pause on whatever else you were doing and get a strong dose of inspiration from Cello Chat. And this week's guest, I have with me Dave Goudy. I am super excited to have Dave Goudy on as my guest this week. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Benjamin?
I'm doing well, too. I'm very glad to hear you're doing great. So for the sake of audience who either does not yet know you or doesn't know your full story, what's your musical background? How did you come to take up the cello in the first place, and how did you get to where you are today?
Before I go into that, I just want to thank you for this opportunity because it who doesn't like talking about themselves? And I was, as I was getting ready for this, I realized that you and I met each other 30 years ago this period when we both enrolled at UT Austin. So if that doesn't make you feel old, that's or this doesn't make you feel old. But I thank you for this opportunity. I know that for some of your viewers who are dedicated cellists, they might not get as much out of this particular session as they would with some of the other great cello pedagogues that you have on your site. I would say, look at going, ooh. In fact, if you're a newbie, if you're a kid who's just seeing this site for the first time, you might want to turn this video off and go see one of the more informative ones, then come back to this later. But yeah, I've played cello since fourth grade, which would have been 1978, 79, somewhere in there. And the only reason I did it was because in third grade, the orchestra director at our elementary school did a session. They brought out the kids who were in the orchestra. The violinist played, the violist played, the cello played, and I just said, oh, I like that one. And so many things came from that one day. The woman who was the orchestra director at the time, her name is Joanne Hall, and she's now Joanne Irwin, who later went on to become the cello professor at UT Arlington, and then became the director of string education at Oberlin for a number of years. And she's recently retired, or maybe not so recently retired, but she's been such an important part of my life. But from that moment, that was my introduction to the instrument, and then she became my private teacher through junior high and high school. So that was just one of those magical moments. And I don't know if maybe that's over exaggeration, but I think we all have those moments in our lives where we suddenly have to make a decision. We just make it, and our lives are completely different. You can look at that point and say, wow, look at what could have been if I had done something otherwise. I went to the University of Miami in Florida with an undergrad in cello performance. And then I met you at University of Texas, Austin, where I was pursuing cello pedagogy. And then talk about the split, the path was that day when I realized that might not be my best decision at that point, that getting the master's wasn't the right thing for me at that time. So I gotten a job through the parent of one of the students in UT String Project. So I was already working at LensCrafters at that point, which was completely foreign to anything I had studied for, anything I'd ever done in my life. And that turned into a 5-year career where I got management skills and experience that helped make the jump back into the arts. When in '98, I got hired by my former youth orchestra, the Youth Orchestra of Fort Worth, to be their general manager. And then since then, over the next 26 years, probably 25 years, I've been in arts management through Youth Orchestra Fort Worth, Youth Orchestra San Antonio, and then the last 14 years here in Oregon with the Oregon Bach Festival. During that time, it's not, the cello hasn't gone away completely, though it's not getting as much love these days as it probably should. But it's in San Antonio, I was playing a lot. I was playing with a number of string quartets that was gigging every weekend. I played with a number of the orchestras, the semi-pro orchestras that were all over the countryside. And I was actually, I even went back to the idea of going back to get my master's. And that's fortunately did not work out because the year was 2006. And I can't imagine where I would have been in 2008 if I'd been looking at like $80,000 worth of debt at that point when the economy crashed. So I was very grateful that I got the job out here in Oregon, and all the bizarre and incredible things have happened since then.
All right, and what do you do at the Oregon Bach Festival?
My title is Director of Education Programs. And the Oregon Bach Festival, for those who aren't familiar with it, was founded in 1970 when this young German conductor who wasn't very well known in the US came over to the University of Oregon, did a conducting master class, and it was such a big hit that they brought him back the next year. And they said, well, while you're here, why don't we do some cantatas also? And so it worked out. And they didn't realize at that point that Helmut Rilling was going to go on to become one of the biggest selling classical conductors in the 80s and 90s for CBS Classical Records. At that time, his approach to the music of Bach was very different from the way it had been performed prior to that. Though the irony is he's not considered a historically informed practitioner because he rejects most of the theories behind it. But he just brought a lighter approach to the performance of Bach that makes a lot of his recordings still very worthy to listen to today, even though he does it's at A = 440 and on modern instruments. But he certainly makes a very strong argument for why modern instruments can do Bach and do Bach well. So over the next 44 years, he kept coming back to Eugene, and it turned this small little conductors festival into something much larger, culminating in a performance at the Hollywood Bowl in the mid 80s doing the B minor mass. And then in the 90s, they won a Grammy for recording of Penderecki's Credo, which had been commissioned by the festival. So it's one of those things where a small town pitches together and overachieves and accomplishes something. And the funny part is, what they did back then isn't that unique now. There's so many festivals and so many Bach festivals across the country. So it's not as unique as it used to be, but it has so many people who have been touched by it over the years. There's so many director of choral activities at universities who got their start at the conducting class. And we also have a high school youth choir that has over 1,000 alums that over the last 25 years has produced a number of young musicians who have gone on into the business. And I'm in charge of that as my current title. In 2015, we added the Baruch Academy for Historical Performance. And that is based on the European Union Baroque Orchestra, which is a program for advanced students and young professionals who have gotten through their training and need something more. And it's also a great way to make connections and meet people from around the country, and also work with faculty from all over. The initial idea was that because we were given this enormous gift to fund it, which was terrific. So we have a great endowment that'll ensure that the program will go on for perpetuity. But the idea initially was to provide an American alternative, so American hip performers don't have to go to Europe to study, that they could stay in America for at least one summer and get the kind of training and experience that they were getting overseas. I don't know if we've quite lived up to that, but it certainly has taken on its own approach, its own narrative. And I'm really proud of what we've accomplished with it. It's an amazing program. And even after the pandemic, we still were able to get a great group of performers together this summer. And I look forward to seeing what what we come up with in the years to come. It's really a special part of my job. And then the last program we added was an organ institute. It makes sense theoretically because Bach was the ultimate organist, but we also were fortunate that we had a guest the summer that we planned this, Paul Jacobs, who's an organist he's the organ professor at Juilliard, and he's also the only organist to have won a Grammy for one of his recordings. And he's just a spectacular person. I'm so lucky to get to work with him. And we bring in 6 organists from around the world who come in and work with him for a week and do master classes, tour local instruments, and then perform a recital as part of the festival. So if you want to know, one of the best things about my job is just how varied it is with the high school youth and the historical performance of the organ. The conducting class is on hold for the moment because we're in the middle of a artistic director search, and it was such a big part of what Helmut Rilling used to do, and we don't want to say, okay, you new person coming in, you have to be Helmut Rilling. If you want to come in and start a conducting class, great, so forth. But and then with all that, beyond all that, I'm also now the director of a chamber music series that runs during the school year. So I get the fun of a budget, and I get to pick which groups come to town, and and it's one of those type series like Chamber Music of Houston or Chamber Music of San Antonio, where you bring in groups like Miro, Eben, the Foray piano quartets coming this fall. We've got the Escher string quartet, groups like that. But so that's been a fun outlet also, because who doesn't want to program their own chamber music series? It's one of those things where you say, "Oh, I can do it," and then you actually get down to the nitty gritty and talking to agents and looking through proposals. And that's what I get to do.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Of course, I get to do it at a time when audiences are still a little hesitant to come back to the concert hall, but I'm hoping this fall that will have alleviated itself and we'll be getting back to our normal size crowds.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That would be great.
Now, I want to ask you the question I always ask about your thoughts on motivating people to practice, for example, helping them along those lines. But I think I first want to set the stage a little bit by how, I think there are some people whose approach to music, to art, to life is intrinsically more aesthetic, more art-based than others. And ever since having met you, you have not had to, as far as I can tell, had to kind of get yourself to think about something that could be interpreted artistically, or to react to it as art. And that's true not just for cello music, but for music in general and other arts. Is that something that you think has, insofar as it's true, of course, correct me if your perspective, if it seems different to you, but is that something that has been the case all through your life, or that you have proactively drawn your attention to, or something else?
It's interesting. I had to think about this a lot when I was teaching in San Antonio, when I had my private studio, because the whole question of how do you motivate a student to practice. And so the first thing you do is, well, look inside. What did I do when I was a student? But I do remember as a kid, we've talked about in the past that I was brought up around the music of Gilbert and Sullivan. But to be more honest, I was only brought up around the music of HMS Pinafore, because my folks had been in a production of it in like the late 60s, right before I was born. And so they had the 2-record set, and you put it on and listen to it. And they had a book that had songs and the stories from the various operas in the canon. And was of the mindset, wow, HMS Pinafore is pretty cool, but some of these other shows look pretty good. This one has ghosts in it, and this one has Japanese people in it, and this one has so forth. And pirates, look, there's some pirates. So from that, I got interested in, well, what do these other works sound like? And that went from just listening to Pirates of Penzance and Mikado and some of the other standard works, but then later in life, especially as we got towards late in the what we refer to the golden era of classical recording, there were so many groups in England that were starting to produce the lesser known works, the ones that are just referred to in text, like Sullivan wrote this other opera with someone else. And then we found out later the name of it. And now we get to hear recordings of it. So it just, that kind of, well, if I like this and this is kind of associated with it, why not listen to it and hope it doesn't let me down? So I've always had a little bit of that. And then the other part of what inspired me as a student was I just found it fun. I just found, and like playing those etudes that were in the Schroeder books. And the funny part was, of course, at that point, I had no idea what a hodgepodge the Schroeder books were. Now that you can actually download all of the Dotzauer and the Lee and all that, those in the opuses that they're from, you can say, oh, no, these aren't as random as they appear in those books. But what I loved about them was playing music for solo cello, even if they're etudes, even if they're dull etudes, that it got across some of the ideas of seventh chords and romantic harmonies, and without realizing what I was listening to. But I was developing an ear for that through those, and I found it fun. I found it kind of, and some of them just had these great moments where they were really borderline beautiful romantic works, and that kept me going. And I love to practice stuff on my own and find etudes that had interesting patterns and challenges to it. So my practice was usually built around what I had to do for my assignments, my schoolwork, for my private lessons, which were all important to me. But I also built in a lot of time for just fun exploration. And then the other part of it was my mom played piano. So we would have, on some Friday nights, we would do cello piano nights. And I didn't realize how important that was until I got to college, and that went away. In fact, it started going away even a little before that, because once you start playing pieces like the Saint-Saëns Cello Concerto, that's not something that mom can just pick up, and especially after a couple of glasses of wine, and play these ridiculously tough piano transcriptions, which so it kind of lost its magic towards the end. Though in the last years of her life, when she'd be over here at the house, there'd be a couple of times I'd prop her up on the piano, pull out some of the easier things, like some Baroque stuff that weren't just challenging. And it just meant the world to both of us, because it was a memory of how much fun it was. So how do you as a teacher create that sense of fun? And I think the answer is not something that's going to come from within. It's going to come from the student. What do they find fun? What gets them interested? And how do you figure that out? And I'm thinking that with something like IMSLP today, where you've got access to the entire world of public domain music, so that you don't have to say, well, try this $20 book, and if you don't like it, sorry, but try another $20 book. Instead, it's download this stuff, give it a try, and tell me which of these titles do you find interesting. And I had a lot of students who were pretty shy and quiet, so it was hard to get them to talk about it. And for some, it may not be classical music in the way that we would that you want to focus on necessarily. But if they get excited by, say, video game music, well, how do you use that? And so maybe have them play the melodies by ear. I mean, this all goes back to Phyllis Young and her entire theory of games and fun and making it. So it all goes back to that. But challenging them to make it relevant to cello. so that they understand that, oh, that's what I'm challenging you to do. Okay, you like the music from this game? Great. Next week, play that theme for me. And then in the meantime, I'm frantically trying to figure out what that theme is so I know if they play it right or if they're just making something up. But I think that's probably the main thing, just how to recreate that sense of fun that was so important to keep me going. Because I certainly didn't enjoy just practicing all state and all region excerpts, and I did enjoy the concertos, but there had to be something more to it.
All right, I got to follow up on this a little bit more, though.
All right.
There's another thing that sometimes happens is that students will give something a try once and they'll go, nope, I don't like it. And you know what you like and what you don't like. But I've also seen you, if you encounter a review of something or somebody says, oh, I really like this, and you engage in a conversation with them and find out why, you're willing to give it a fresh look too. You know what I mean? You will reassess it. And I don't know that necessarily comes automatically for youngsters. Do you ever address that sort of, well, maybe either listen to another recording or listen to it with this context in mind, learn a little bit about the historical background of it, things like that?
What makes me think of is like my conversations with my 11-year-old daughter, where and she's wonderful. So before I trash her here in front of this audience, but if she's like picky about a certain food, but she likes this other food, and I want her to try this food, I think it's this whole debate about what logic can I use that at least get her to put the food in her mouth. And she may still, just to be contrary, say, oh, I hate it, even though she'll like it from another brand. So I think it's just a matter of, I'm a big supporter of challenging kids when they state opinions. Just make them, don't just accept, oh, I didn't like it. Well, what didn't you like about it? Mm-hmm. Really make them spell out what it is. And that's probably one of the best things as a teacher we can do, is get them thinking about art at a deeper level, that it's not just, oh, I listened to Beethoven 5. That's kind of cool. No, it's Beethoven 5. And it's awesome because of this incredible power. And it's a theme that you've heard your whole life. It's in commercials and movies. And yet when you sit there and listen to it the first time, especially if you're in an orchestra and you're on stage and you're surrounded by the instruments and the power that you feel on that time, that's really something. So getting kids to talk critically about their feelings, I think, is probably as important as a role for the teacher as showing them how to properly play their instruments, because we want them to develop their own thoughts and ideas and artistry. So I think the idea of getting them thinking about it, and so in this case, if a kid walks in and says, yeah, I didn't like this piece, so I didn't practice it, challenge them. I one of my favorite things about teaching is that you can get away with saying very strong things to them, as long as they understand that you don't mean it personally, that you're not judging them as a person, you're just challenging them to do better. And that as long as they feel like, I feel like I can say to a child who plays for me, that note isn't right, and I know why it's not right, and I think you know why it's not right. Then let's talk about it. That by being able to do that kind of conversation and logic, even children with different ways of looking at the world will still buy into it and fall for the trap. I've always get excited when I see evidence that, oh yeah, that still works, and you still have to watch yourself. You can't say, well, that was dreadful. What is wrong with you? No, obviously don't say that, but you can be critical and say, we're going to work together to make this better. So they understand that they're not in this alone, that you're with them, but you're also tough. My friend, Lisa, who I think you met once or twice, that's down in Houston. She's become a master at that. Her students know she's tough as nails, and they know she can get angry. And man, I've seen her angry. Sorry, Lisa, but I I just love the way her kids are just addicted to her because they know she's on their side, and that's the part of the psychology of teaching that I think all plays in this whole thing about creating a fun space, creating a creative space, and getting them realizing how our imaginations aren't just something that we not just for fun. It's something that we can really use in our daily lives, and that it's one of the best things about being thinking people.
That's so true. Once that imagination is not only unleashed, but tied to what they do when they get that deal out of the case.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is why I think it's great. I mean, for myself these days, what gets me going is the opportunity to play with others. And that's one of the worst things about the pandemic was you didn't. And I watched my daughter start violin. I had a suspicion she was doing it more to please the old man than to please herself, which proved to be the case. But her first year was online. It was on Zoom. And as lovely as this conversation is, I wouldn't want to have a violin or a cello lesson through this medium. And when everything was done and she was able to get back into a room with other people, the magic was gone. And so she ended up quitting. But she's singing now and she's absolutely loving it. So there you go. That's it. So I don't feel like it was wasted time. Yeah. And she's found something that she loves so much more.
Excellent. Outstanding. Well, Dave, what are some of the things coming down the pike? What are some things you're, besides getting back to normal, excited about in the fall of 22 or next spring?
Well, I have been taking accounting classes. I know. Because when the whole classical world got shut down in the spring of 2020, I realized it might be good to have a plan B. And I mean, when you hear of like some of the big stars of the classical field were having to apply for food stamps, it was just like, oh man, as much as I feel like art has its place in our society, it didn't have a place in a world where the economy was shut down. So I felt like it was important if something like this comes up again, or if I burn out. Jobs like mine aren't widespread. So if I need to move at some point and I can't find something like what I'm doing, accounting is certainly more spread out. I need to stay gainfully employed for at least 17, 18 more years. And I figure that that's certainly something that'll help me stay mentally active and financially supportive for the family. So I'm pursuing that right now online through Southern Oregon University. And we haven't talked about recorders, but I'm the conductor of the Eugene Recorder Orchestra, which, I mean, I think, I don't know if we had talked much about the recorder business, but about 20 years ago when I was in Dallas, a friend of mine talked about playing recorder, and he would go to the big recorder festival, which they call the Texas Toot. And he was always excited about the toot. And my dad had played recorder when I was a kid. And I have a memory of this, that they had them in the closet with a bunch of duet books. And if he came across someone at work who said, oh yeah, I used to play recorder, they'd invariably be invited over for dinner. And then mom would go hide in the closet with their hands over her ears while they would play recorder duets. So through this friend, I got I got an alto recorder, and we set up and did some ensemble stuff. Then when I moved to San Antonio, I started hanging out with the local group, which they were they were they were about my level of playing. Then I get here to Eugene, Oregon, and there are a lot of people who play recorder out here. In fact, a lot more people play recorder and early music in this area than play modern instruments in community orchestras. So I've kind of lost my community orchestra outreach that I used to do in San Antonio. But here I've got this bizarre new world with a lot of music that doesn't pop up much in our world of modern cello. I think you'll be impressed by this. I think at this point, if you were to drop the needle on a piece, just a random piece by Tallis, Bird, or Gibbons, I could probably tell you which composer it is. And that wouldn't have been true 10 years ago. That I'm to the point where I can actually hear the nuance, the difference between the different composers. So that's kind of a thrill to me that in my in this other music outlet, I've found something that's certainly more interesting than the Grout textbook ever was about this period of music. And so yeah, that's a very exciting part. In that we're now performing again. We would rehearse in somebody's backyard, which was fine during the dry season, but once the rainy season started, that didn't help. But now we're back indoors, and in fact, we're going to be playing a concert in a few weeks with a sonatina by Mozart. It's the Ave Maria by Verdi, arranged for recorders, which is actually works a lot better than you might think.
No, I bet. I'd like.
And then the prelude to the Well-Tempered Clavier B minor, Book 1. That I've also had them before the pandemic. I hadn't played the prelude and the fugue too, but that's brutal. The prelude is smack. That's just wonderful. So yeah, I'm really excited about. I loved conducting. I don't know if you remember that in San Antonio, I had a string ensemble through the Tuesday Musical Club that met weekly, and they were, and I just loved that. That was so much fun, and I still miss it to this day, even though it's 14 years later. But the recorders, with a lot of caveats, have been a great replacement for it. I mean, it's a tough instrument to program because they've got such limited ranges. So you can't just throw anything in front of them. But I've got a group of incredible players, and they handle a lot of challenges that I continually am amazed and delighted with what they can do. So that's between that and the chamber music series with all the names I have coming. I'd be like Barry Douglas. I had this opening, I had this hole in there. I was like trying to figure out, and I thought, let's do a piano recital. And I'm looking at the who all's on the sheets. And I remember Barry Douglas from the 90s because he won he was third place in the Van Cliburn competition. And then when I won the Tchaikovsky a year later. And he's a great romantic pianist. And I've talked to his agent. He was available. He's coming to Eugene. And that's fun. That's a lot of fun and it's not something that I prepared for. It's not like I got a doctorate in I guess musicology or whatever. I don't know what field you would pursue to do this kind of programming, but I think I've proved myself through the years at OBF of what my tastes are, how things come together. And I have people that I bounce the ideas off of to make sure that I'm not going out of my mind. But it is fun. It is a lot of fun. And I think that's kind of how I ended. I mean, I just haven't studied enough historical performance to say I'm an authority on it, but I do have enough experience that I can organize this academy and then bring in the big guns, the people who really know it, and they shape the curriculum and they shape what happens, but through the conversation. And so, yeah, that's what's been checking my musical boxes lately. That, and I've gotten into jazz. So go figure. Yeah, there you go. I needed something new, so jazz was the current discovery.
Wow. Does jazz go well with accounting? Isn't that how the jazz conductors they count off? They do accounting, a 1 and a 2. No.
You come for the cello information, you stay for the dad jokes. It's
well, and best of luck then with the new artistic director. That'll be a fun new dimension as well, I'm sure.
It should be. You know, I wish I could say more. We have a big press release next week that
okay.
Maybe, in fact, by the time people see this, it probably will be out if they were so moved to look it up. But yeah, you know, it's funny. The arts, you don't escape the politics of humans against humans. It just, I still marvel that we can be in this field that brings such happiness and joy to ourselves, and yet we can become so miserable dealing with other people, and we make ourselves crazy sometimes by digging into it, and other people drive us crazy.
Well, I'm very glad we have the arts to go to.
Yes, absolutely.
Recharge.
That's right. Because no, but you're right. You're absolutely right.
And on that note, maybe that could be the send-off for a weekend of practicing. Happy practicing out there, everybody, and thanks so much to you, Dave, for being on the program.
Thank you for letting me come on and blather for 30 minutes.
All right, take care, everybody, and we'll see you this time next Friday.